And this afternoon, we talk about Ghana's economic crisis. Government's austerity plan to roll out a debt exchange program is already escalating pre-existing agitation by organized labor. Well, Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta earlier this morning revealed that a debt sustainability analysis points to the fact that Ghana's public debt is unsustainable. In view of this, a number of remedial steps are being taken by government, including a debt exchange program. Let's bring you key highlights of what the implication of this program will be, as announced by the Finance Minister. Here are excerpts on your screens right now in terms of what you need to know about the debt exchange program. So the key factors there on your screens. First of all, according to the Finance Minister, individual holders of domestic bonds are first of all not affected and will not lose the face value of their instruments. Beyond that as well, we know that Treasury bills are completely exempted and all holders will be paid the full value of their investments on maturity. Beyond that, government is also giving a firm assurance that there will be no haircut on the principal of bonds. We need to take a very critical look at that because there may be subsequent issues that will affect, obviously, the interest aspect. Beyond that as well, exchange for new Ghana bonds with a coupon that steps up to 10% as soon as 2025, with the first interest payment in 2024, of course, and some longer average maturity instruments will now have to setting as part of government's austerity plan. And then we also do know that when it comes to existing domestic bonds as of the 1st of December 2022, they will be exchanged for a new set of 4 bonds, which will be maturing as far as in 2027, 2029, 2032, and the extreme end will be 2037. So these are some of the key measures being rolled out by the Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta. But when it comes to predetermined allocation ratio, of course, it will be as follows: 17% for short bonds, 17% for intermediate bonds, and we have 25% for medium-term bonds and a 41% for long-term bonds as well. The annual coupon on all of these new bonds, as the Finance Minister is pointing out, is being set at 0%. So the whole of 2023 will have no interest yielding on all of the investments that we're seeing. 5% may now accrue by, of course, 2024, and then eventually in 2025, you may be having some 10% on the maturity. So that's the plan government is rolling out. And they are saying all of this is happening simply because this is a key requirement to secure an IMF support. That's been settled and that's been stated by Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta. Well, speaking of the Finance Minister himself, he's also revealed that, of course, as part of the IMF conditionalities, government is taking some of these measures to ensure that we secure the deal.
Until maturity. Coupon payments will be semi-annual. For emphasis, this domestic debt exchange program will not affect individual bondholders. This domestic debt exchange is part of a more comprehensive agenda to restore debt and financial sustainability. We are also working towards a restructuring of our external indebtedness, which we will announce in due course. This is a key requirement to allow Ghana's economy to recover as fast as possible from this crisis. This is also a key requirement to secure an IMF support. We are confident that of the measures we are putting in place, including those outlined in the 2023 budget statement and underpinned by a successful IMF program, Ghana will witness a stable and thriving economy from 2023. We accordingly anticipate that inflation will be returned to single digits, ensuring that real return on these new bonds will be protected. As His Excellency the President declared in his address to the nation on 30th August, 30th October 2020, and I quote, "To restore and sustain debt sustainability, we plan to reduce our total public debt to GDP ratio to some 55% in present value terms by 2028. This can only be achieved through the active participation of all key economic actors, In that perspective, we call upon all domestic debt holders to take their share in ensuring that public sustainability is quickly restored by participating in this exchange program. Our pledge to you all is that government will take all appropriate measures to safeguard the solvency of the financial institutions involved in the exchange. Thanks to well-targeted regulatory measures and the creation of a financial stability fund, banks, pension funds, insurance companies, fund managers, and collective investment schemes will be supported to ensure that they are able to meet the obligations to their clients as they fall due. For this reason, the Governor of the Bank of Ghana will follow suit with details of the necessary assistance in due course. We have also dialogued extensively with regulators across the financial sector, including the Securities and Exchange Commission, National Insurance Commission, and the National Pensions Regulatory Authority to agree that regulatory forbearance will be provided to all entities whose financial position is adversely affected by virtue of participating in this exchange.
And barely hours after that announcement by the finance minister, he's getting quite a strong reaction this time around from organized labor. We have a bit of a developing story for you on this. The Trades Union Congress, the mother body of organized labor, has just issued a statement. Let's bring you excerpts of what it is that the Trades Union Congress is talking about. Let's bring you excerpts. It indicates that the Trades Union Congress is gravely concerned about government's domestic debt exchange program launched today, December 5, 2022, because of its potential negative impact on workers' pensions. We're equally concerned about the lack of prior engagement, as organized labor is revealing for the very first time, with labor giving that substantial portion of the workers' pension is invested in government bonds. Now, they are going ahead to point out that we've taken special note of the statement by the Minister for Finance that the debt exchange program is voluntary. Of course, the TUC will scrupulously analyze the propriety, I should say, or otherwise, of the participation of pension funds of its members in the program. And then this is TUC continuing to indicate that we're assuring workers that the TUC and its affiliate unions, which includes, for instance, NAT, which held a press conference earlier today, that they'll do everything in their power to ensure that members are fully protected and that not even a peso of pension funds is lost in the debt restructuring program. We're therefore appealing to all workers and unions to remain calm as we work to protect our retirement funds. On this note, I want to bring in now Bernard Ajay, who's the Secretary of the Public Sector Workers Union. That's one of the labor unions belonging to the umbrella body of TUC. Bernard, thank you for joining us. In fact, we're hearing for the very first time now that you've not been engaged ever since government planned on rolling out the debt exchange program. How true is this?
Well, thank you very much, Blessed, and good afternoon to you and all your listeners. It is as you see and as you have rightly read, organized labor, or for that matter, the TUC, have not been properly engaged on these matters, especially regarding our pension funds being affected by these measures that government is trying to put in place. We find that very unacceptable. We find that as an insult to the dignity of workers, that with all the challenges that we are going through and the sacrifices we have made over the years to make sure that this economy gets back on track, the insensitivity of government to ensure that they even follow us and touch the meager pensions that our members are currently receiving have very much infuriated us. And as the statement has indicated, we are going to do everything in our power to ensure that not even a peso of our pension funds are made to suffer or are used for this debt exchange program.
Yeah, but I mean, to be fair to government says this is a voluntary program. What's your biggest fear as organized labor?
Well, we don't understand what they mean by voluntary because, Blessed, let's cast our mind back as to how even our funds got locked up in government bonds. When we were agitating for our pension funds to be given back to us, so that our schemes could manage these funds. Remember, all these funds were given to us in form of government bonds. And most of the pension funds have substantial portions of their funds in these government bonds. So realistically, we would have chosen or gone for other options on the market. So in the first place, we were forced even into these government bonds in the first place. So something like this happening and looking at sacrifices we have made, we think that at least a proper engagement to even understand how to go about this would have been appropriate. And we think that government is just going for the easier option by making workers suffer unnecessarily and unduly in all these measures. And we think that the adage that there is no alternative is not true. Government has not explored all the alternatives. And especially when it comes to pension funds, we are not going to leave any stone unturned, and we are going to resist it fiercely and make sure that our pension funds are protected.
Probably you have an idea of what the alternatives are. That's your position as trade, groups under the Trade Union Congress. What's the alternative? Because government says I'm out of options. I can't go onto the international market. I need to run this debt exchange program. You say there's an alternative. Where is that alternative really?
Well, there are a lot of alternatives, including how you spend. We've all seen the budget. We've seen the further measures, if I may describe them even as draconian measures, that are going to further worsen the plight of workers. The loans we went for, which has put us into debt, what did government use it for? What are the priorities that have been set in the budget for 2023? Why are those priorities as against workers' pension funds? Why? So I think in this country, it is time we stand up to certain things and make sure that enough is enough. Let's sit at the table and look at what is good for the country, but not what is good for a few people. And workers, after suffering, would also be punished again for this meager pension. So as for the alternatives, there are a lot of well-meaning Ghanaians since this crisis began who have also spoken on this matter. We think that when the proper engagement takes place, all the options, we put all our cards on the table. This is just a statement because of what we have heard this morning. TUC, we are meeting, and I believe that we'll escalate it to all levels. We'll bring in all the necessary stakeholders in this country, and we are going to demand for a major reform and major restructuring to make sure that things are done properly, that even as we are coming out of this crisis, we don't just come out for the next government or any government that comes to just do things anyhow and make workers pay for it. So we have a number of options, and we think that at the appropriate time, we'll lay them out.
Let's talk about just snippets of that meeting. I'm sure that by now informal engagements have started because TUC is serving notice that you will protect every pursuer of your members. What are you likely to do if all attempts to get an alternative doesn't work?
Well, my brother, thank you very much. We are workers. We are going to use all legitimate structures and means to make sure that our voices are heard. But of course, if reason fails to prevail, of course, we'll go back to our members. And whatever decision our members will take, including industrial action, we will take to make sure that not even a peso of our pension funds are used in this debt measure.
Right, and finally, Bernard, this is just coming on the back of the recent agitations on the labor front. You've been asking for a 60% rise in public sector pay. Looking at what's happening now, how do you situate that in the new demand that you're going to be making, that you want to protect your pensions, whilst you also call for salary increments? The facts on the grounds are that government has no funds for you.
Well, thank you very much, my brother. It's very interesting that we are all accepting that government has no funds, but we don't have issue with the kind of expenditure they have even proposed to be doing. And no, everybody seems to accept it that it is okay. If we don't have funds, why are we thinking about cathedral? Why is cathedral a more important project? Don't we have churches that we worship in? Why are we going for things that it is after your belly is full, you satisfy your basic needs before you start thinking about. So we think that let's have a proper conversation. We think that government is committing funds to things that can hold on in terms of this crisis. But so long as government doesn't see it as something that should hold on, then our pension funds can also not go. And before I forget, our 60% still stands. And we are we've made very genuine arguments. All we are asking for the 60% or the details of the 60% is very simple. We are saying that the minimum wage should not be more than the base pay. That's all we are asking. And when we started the single spine salary structure, the base pay was 10% above the minimum wage. We are asking for that restoration. And you have given us COLA, which you are taking away in December. And we are saying that you should regularize that COLA. That is the basis of the 60%. We have not yet even really added what we should add on top. So the 60% is just the barest minimum that we can do for now. So we are still standing by our 60%. We are still indicating that the measures announced this morning, we are not going to allow even a peso of our pension fund to go into this debt restructuring. And the earlier government sits down with us so that we put on the table what we also think should be done. And if they are not ready to listen to us, if they are not ready to sacrifice those expenditure measures, why do we still have all the ministers and the deputy ministers we have if we are struggling? Why do we have all the V8s and other things running around if we are struggling? We are not seeing much in terms of the expenditure. When we are struggling and we don't have money, rather, we are projected for an increased expenditure and an increased suffering on the ordinary worker by increasing VAT and also increasing the income tax threshold. Why are we doing this to ourselves? We are insisting we deserve the 60% we are asking for. We are also going to do anything in our rights to ensure that our pension funds are also not taken away from us. The pensioners are already suffering. That when you go into it, the tier 2 pensions that are even currently being paid are not even living up to expectation. And you further want to do this disguised haircut on our pensions. We are tired. It has gotten to our neck. We won't sit down and choke to death. We will come out and we will demand that the right thing is done. So it's up to government to do the necessary things. The proper engagements should take place. We'll lay our cards there. And if it's acceptable, we can reach a compromise and make sure that we not only bring back this country on its track, but we ensure that measures are put in place so that nobody takes us for granted.
We need to go finally in just about 30 seconds. Have you put a cost to this if government goes ahead to run the debt exchange program on potentially the number of pensioners will be affected as members of your group?
Well, so, the announcement just came. I'm on a pension board, a public sector pensions board, and we are meeting as well. We are going to do all these assessments and see the impacts and the implications, and that is going to inform all the other actions that we are going to take between now until government rescinds its decision to add our pension funds to this restructuring. And
I'm grateful for your time now, Bernard Ajay, General Secretary of the Public Sector Workers Union, of course adding their voice to that of TUC, NAT and NAGRAT, I should say. That's the National Association of Graduate Teachers. Earlier today also added their voice resenting what it is that the Finance Minister intends to do with some debt exchange program. Listen to the teachers explain their concerns.
And when the president speaks, citizens ought to take the president seriously. On Friday, which was a public holiday, the Ministry of Finance invited the fund managers of all the schemes in this country to a meeting and indicated to them the intention of government to implement this policy of reducing the values of our investment with government as a result of the economic situation we find ourselves. To slap these percentages again on our investment is shooting us with a double-barreled gun. The sad thing is that some of these bonds that have been purchased by the various schemes is as a result of government inability to have transferred funds to the various schemes on time and had to negotiate with Labour to convert some of these arrears into bonds. Now that you've made us convert some of these arrears into bonds, you are now telling us that by force majeure, we will have to accept a certain percentage. Who does that? And where does that happen? I have entered into a contractual agreement with you. The contractual agreement indicates that the workers' money, and this we are talking about both private sector and public sector, because almost every worker in this country pays tier 2.
That's more from Angel Kabunu, who says that NAGRAT and other labor unions will resist government's decision with all their might and force them to reverse the decision.
My union, NAGRAT, the teacher unions will not accept this. We are members of the forum made up of the public sector unions, and we want to assure our members that we will resist this move by government. We will resist this move by government by any means necessary. That we will not accept this. No worker in this country is going to accept this. We will not, under any circumstances, be shortchanged by any government taking away poor people's monies, poor pensioners' monies. I thought that pension is a social security situation, and that every government ought to be very interested in the pensions of people. People who have worked for this country for 30 years, who have worked for this country for 40 years, now that they are becoming most vulnerable and going back to rest, we say that the monies that they have invested should be taken away just because government have failed economically. We will not accept this situation.
Well, more reactions have been greeting this because the minority in Parliament is describing as unacceptable government's decision to carry out the debt exchange program. Minority Leader in Parliament, Haruna Idrisu, earlier today addressed the media to, of course, lay out what the concerns of the minority side of the House is on these emerging matters.
Let me state without any fear of contradiction that the form and structure of the debt announced by Minister Ken Ofori-Atta is unacceptable to us, and we simply will not accept it. I shudder to ask, how come that the contours, I'm quoting him, of this debt exchange program was not announced in the budget statement that was presented to Parliament? Were investors consulted? Bondholders, were they consulted? How did he come to this conclusion? Are we not right to state that this amounts to an economic imposition against the investment intents and wishes of those who bought the bonds? So we simply, as a minority, are cautioning that government is simply breaking contracts according to the plans revealed by the finance minister this morning. These developments will deter investors without first informing and consulting them of what your plans were. The best way to manage a crisis, in our view, is to anticipate it or reduce its impact, or at best prevent it from happening. They simply failed in preventing this from happening.
Well, so that's Minority Leader Haruna Idrisu there. Let's get more on this. Joining us in studio now is Kweku Ricketts-Hagan, Cape Coast South MP and former Deputy Minister in charge of finance during the SWAL NDC administration. It's a good time to be talking to you, sir. Welcome to the polls.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
And you've watched your leader in Parliament lay out what the concerns of the minority is. What's of key or utmost concern to you as someone who's worked at the finance ministry and having looked at the program being laid out by the finance minister today? What's of key concern to you?
Thanks very much, and good afternoon to our viewers. Well, pretty much everything is of concern to me. I mean, ever since this government actually came into office, the style of doing things doesn't seem to be the norm. But then they every time try and get away with it. I mean, what is concerning about this is that a budget was presented not too long ago, where they mentioned that there's going to be a debt exchange. We thought that would have come with the details and didn't. Few days later, some details were announced at Sunday night, followed by some more on Monday morning, and it looks as if they are trying to get a debt exchange through the back door. So that's of concern.
But if you ask, the finance minister says, well, I stated it in the budget, except that it was not explicit. So I'm giving the details now of what it is I intend to do.
The question is that whatever gets agreed or whatever gets approved will have to be done in Parliament. So if you have the information, why didn't you put it in the budget? Why do you have to bring in the budget? And what are you going to do? Bring a supplementary budget? Or you are coming to, just tell us this? At the end of the day, all these things have to be approved. Now, what I do know is that, to go on a program, I'm talking about the IMF, right. To start negotiating with your creditors is when you have actually gotten a staff level agreement. But as far as I know, we haven't gotten a staff level agreement yet. So it looks as if the finance minister is just preempting things by coming up with it, because after the staff level agreement, you will need to negotiate with your creditors. I mean, has that been done? Was this figures that they've churned out done unilaterally, or was it done with the domestic creditors in this case? I mean, we're told that we should hold on, the external creditors one will come. But the domestic investors, who have you spoken to? We heard they were talking to some bankers or whatever, but it's much wider than that. We have pension fund, insurance companies, various schemes that invest in our bonds. I mean, have we spoken to all these people, and have they agreed? I mean, don't forget that the president shot himself in the foot, or the government, in the foot, from the very onset by coming out to say that there's not going to be any haircut. Right. And then you don't go into a negotiation putting your cards on the table that there is not going to be a haircut. Now they've gone in there and it looks as if there is a haircut.
Okay, when minority in Parliament, and we heard your leader say that we will not accept this, what's the implication?
Well, the implication, before we come to the implication, we are not accepting this because we believe that there are other alternatives to deal with the problem. Right. I mean, we are a country that we are spending too much money. We're not able to raise the revenue. Therefore, we are building up deficit that makes us go and borrow. And we've been borrowing, and that has brought us to this end. It looks as if this finance minister doesn't know anything other than borrowing. And then we heard him saying that he couldn't get to the financial market, the capital market again for 3 years. And he seems to be nervous about it. So it looks as if that he doesn't see any other alternative. If he can't borrow, then perhaps he needs to do this to create a space to borrow.
Okay, is that entirely the picture? Because I've read the statement from the finance minister. He points to some exogenous factors, or factors that are not within necessarily government's purview, the external factors, and you've heard these arguments. COVID-19 pandemic, the Russian-Ukraine war is featuring once more in the statement of the finance minister. And he says, well, we're helpless. We need to find a way out with this austerity plan with the IMF. So it's not entirely government's fault if you say he's just borrowing his way out.
Well, don't forget, we don't live on Mars. We are on planet Earth, where the COVID and the Ukraine war and everything happens. I mean, how many countries are going through what we are going through? At least in Africa here, we are the only country going through this debt, type of overhang and this type of destruction we are suggesting. So that clearly tells you that.
But of course, there are some Southern African countries that are also going through the process, for instance.
Not on the same scale.
Right.
I mean, our currency is the worst currency in the world. I mean, why are the others not at the same level as us? It tells you that some economies were better planned and better prepared than us. I mean, nobody is questioning the COVID and the Russian war. But
so you accept that argument? You accept that it's a major factor that's contributing to the war today?
I wouldn't say that it's a major factor. What I will say is that if your house is built on straw, when the storm comes, you are the one going to suffer most. And the guys who build their houses on proper bricks and mortar will still be standing. So yes, I'm saying that it had an impact. I wouldn't want to use the word major, because if you look at some of the economic indicators, inflation and others, you could see that a good chunk of it is also as a result of us not doing well with our own economy. I mean, you have food inflation. You can even look at the fuel situation and see that, well, it's exogenous. But we also benefit. We are an oil-producing nation. Therefore, if we are suffering at the pump in terms of crude prices going up, we are getting money on the other side where we are exporting crude. So why can't we use that to mitigate, the front end and just sit there and waste time for so long that now we've gotten to a situation where these things have affected inflation, it's affected the depreciation of the currency, and we are in kind of a vicious circle. Then we get a Bank of Ghana comes in and continue to aggressively put up a monetary policy that itself is creating problems through cost of lending, and eventually will get us into a recession. In addition to all the problems that we have, it tells you clearly that the managers of the economy actually don't know what they are doing.
And that's why I was asking about the implication when you say you would not accept this.
Well, what we are trying to tell them is that you go back to the drawing board and there are other things that you can do other than coming up with this. I mean, even if you have to do this, not in this quantum, because if you look at your expenditure and then you are doing these cosmetic cuts, 30%, 30%, that we don't even know what the quantum of those percentages that we are cutting, but we know that they don't amount to much. Then it's problematic when we have cathedral being built in the middle of a storm, and we are in a storm. You build the cathedral, which is costing about 400 million. We don't have a clear line item in the budget, to deal with that. We have frivolous, wasteful expenditures. We have the central bank doing deficit financing to fund, projects that are not going anywhere. Because if the projects are going somewhere, you would have seen the result. If Planting for Food and Jobs, where we put almost about 600 million on top of the Ministry of Agriculture's budget, is actually working, you would have seen that food inflation is coming down. If 1D, 1F, as they tell us that there are almost about 200 or so factories, if that is really working, you wouldn't have the unemployment situation that we have at the moment. So basically the policies are not working and we are not prepared to review them, but we are throwing money at them where nobody knows what the economic impact of those are. And that is why we are where we are.
In all of this, all I get from the minority argument is the simple case of cutting costs. But how far can we go in cutting the costs?
We can go as far as we want to go. Obviously, not only minority, but the civil society and some experts, independent experts, have suggested that the size of government is too big. We started with 120, we got no result. We brought it to, 80 or whatever. And people are saying that, look, we could do with 30 or even less ministers. But the president or the government is reluctant to do that. Look at the presidential staffers, where we spent last year, I think, 1.3 billion on them. And this, you believe that this area can be halved. There are so many things you're talking about. People should not be using four-wheel drives and all that. Who is monitoring that? If I pick my four-wheel drive and I step out in the street of Accra, do you know if I'm going to my constituency in the central region or going to Parliament? I mean, so these cosmetic things that they're talking about, it's like scratching the surface of the problem, but they are not actually dealing with the problem. And that we are in a situation where clearly now our debt is not sustainable. I think they've come around to accept, because initially there were some kind of a dancing around, even with the IMF, that we need to do debt sustainability analysis and all that. Now it is clear that Ghana's debt is unsustainable. Ghana is actually insolvent, technically. When your debt to GDP is almost over 100, you are insolvent.
What do you say to someone or critics who say you're setting double standards? At the time the NDC was taking us to the IMF, there were conditionalities. Were debt distressed, you had to take some cost-cutting measures at the time. Now our debt is unsustainable. And the only examples that we've seen around the world is that obviously this is the way we're going. We need to restructure our debts. So if that's the case and government is pursuing that, why have an issue with it? Why not support government just to ensure that, first of all, we get out of the woods? You're setting double standards, aren't you?
But you know clearly that our issue is not about, it's not about IMF. I think we were the first to be talking about going to the IMF when the government actually told us that they are not going to IMF today or tomorrow, and that we are a proud nation and we can deal with the problem. When clearly we could see that IMF probably is the best path to go. So the issue here is about decision making. It's about bad policies. It's about not understanding the economy that they are managing. And that is why we are asking the likes of the finance minister to leave the scene, to give the opportunity, hopefully for somebody else to come and start us afresh.
Since you're raising that point, of course, the minority leader himself was part of those who mooted the idea, and then we got to the level of having a vote of a motion of censure.
Yeah.
We've not heard anything in the last few days after the expiration of the 7-day window given by the Speaker of Parliament.
Yeah.
Would you say that, giving the admission that the Finance Minister has done today, that we're at very unsustainable levels in terms of our public debt, you're reinforcing the calls for him to step down now?
Absolutely, absolutely. And then, you know, it's a process. We haven't come to the end of the process, neither have we abandoned it. But
it's not a case that you're relaxed about it, because that's
well,
the approach. That's what we see from the outside, that the minority is no longer interested in.
Quite a number of things going on at the moment, mainly to do with the budget. I mean, I'm sure very soon we'll come to that. But then, of course, we've got to do things, you know, following a proper system, not to you know, jeopardize certain things. Okay, but of course, if we had got our brothers and sisters on the other side to really, you know, talk the talk and walk the walk, we probably wouldn't be here getting the finance minister even to read the budget in the first place. But then, of course, they made a decision, and then God knows what happened with businessmen and other people arriving in Parliament, and all of a sudden meeting up with the president, and the position has changed. I mean, the guy who has brought us where we are is the guy who's supposed to restore the economy, the guy who doesn't believe in the IMF, and probably the feeling is mutual, that the IMF also don't believe in him, that he's committed enough to carry out.
That's your suspicion?
That's my suspicion. It is obvious that if you don't like somebody and you make it so obvious that you don't like the person, then you might force the person to more or less, you know, reciprocate on that. You know, so if I'm sitting down negotiating with you, but I know that you don't believe in whatever I'm doing with you, but then you are forced to do it, the chances are you are not going to do a good job. And then secondly, if your president has hinted, your members of parliament, that let the gentleman finish the negotiation and then we'll see what to do with him, you wouldn't feel comfortable negotiating with such a person, because the person you are negotiating with might not be the person who will end up implementing what he is agreeing on. So what about if a new finance minister comes in? Yes, government is binding, but a new finance minister comes in and say the deal is not a good one, and therefore he needs to renegotiate it. Where does that leave you? So the IMF itself doesn't sit comfortably. They were supposed to be here some time ago. They didn't come. They showed up
recently.
So that tells you that they are getting a cold feels like a marriage they don't want to enter. But for some reason, I don't know whether it's out of pity or whatever, you know, they still want to marry us.
I've heard the ranking on the Finance Committee in Parliament, Dr. Tuforson, talk about the fact that as part of the remedial measures, Ghanaians must help the NDC come to power and to vote out the NPP. I don't intend to do politics on this, but if we're to turn the tables around and to have the NDC, of course, in charge of the economy now, the NPP believes it would have been worse.
Well, that is their belief, or I don't know if it's their wish. But then I would rather they focus on turning the economy around, because they are holding the steering wheel now. It's not us. We are just supporting them, you know, to get the Ghana vehicle to a proper destination. So, I mean, to say that based on what? I mean, we have made very solid suggestions as to the direction that the economy should go. They just haven't listened. Well, we are telling them that seriously, you can cut the expenditure, because look, we make estimates, that is revenue estimates, that are really not realistic, that are not achievable. It's good to be ambitious, but you have to be realistic. So we set all these targets, and the reason why we do it is we want to suppress the deficit. So if you set up a very high expenditure revenue target, then you are likely to match it with also a much higher expenditure. Okay, you may show a much smaller deficit than it should be, but don't forget that accumulation of your deficit, it what gives you your debt. Therefore, if you suppress your deficit, then the chances are you are going to finance it with a smaller borrowing, but yet you end up with below the line items and all those things, which itself you go behind the scene to finance them. So in the end, your projections will not match your reality, because your deficit will end up being bigger than it is. But in projection, you try to meet the Fiscal Responsibility Act. So this is why, because if you look at Ghana and you say, look, if these guys, put COVID aside, if these guys have really been scoring the deficit that they've been showing us, why is it that our debt is so much? Because you use your debt to finance your deficit. So if your deficit is as slim as they have shown us, you would have thought that your borrowing wouldn't also be that much. So there's a clear mismanagement, and it's either they don't understand the economy, or they're out of their debt with it. And the earlier the finance minister goes, the better. And then many others will follow, like the central bank governor, the chairman of the EMT, who is now a missing person in all this. The man who's been lecturing all across the country is now cannot be found. You know, be found.
Are you sure the vice president cannot be found?
Well, not in these matters. I mean, he's doing digital work, I believe, you know, which is not what I think he went to school for. But that's what he has, you know, chosen to do now. But we are not hearing him in times of crisis, where the whiz kid or whatever he is as an economist, we can't hear from him. And we also hearing that he said they are not giving him an opportunity. I mean, the number 2 man on the land. It's just ridiculous. But we are in serious situation now. Very, very serious situation. And for me personally, I am a bit concerned, because we are trying to do the right thing, but time is also not on our side. Right. Because if we don't get IMF program or whatever, since this is the only way these guys, the only tunnel these guys could see, then the question becomes that if we don't get a program, then what happened? Because they don't seem to know any other option.
Right, big question you're asking there.
That is
so we need to go, but what would be your message to your constituents and the entire populace watching us now about the future of Ghana's economy?
Well, let's put pressure. This government has got 2 more years to go. You know, if democracy is going to take its course, and we all want to live in democracy, then one of the things I want all of Ghana to support us in doing is to force this government to change course. And by cutting our quota according to our size, cutting expenditure seriously, cut off all the wasteful expenditures, the frivolous flying of private jet, and then people are talking to the president and he's not listening, and he thinks he can do whatever he wants. And that's the problem that we're in at the moment. We have ministers who are not even interested in the very budget that they have put together in cabinet, and they prefer to go, you know, and do other things elsewhere. So these guys are not serious, but you know, sometimes you can become not serious, if I can put it that way, if you really don't know what to do. So you pretend as if you don't want to do anything, but really, the truth of the matter is that you really don't have an idea what to do. And I think personally, I think that's where they are. If you look at the economics, I always tell people that if you don't understand economics and finance in this country today, you are probably better off, because you can close your mind and think that when they say things will get better. But if you look at the real numbers and look at where we are going, my brother, it's really scary. And if something is not done, you know, we could be at the tip of the cliff.
Well, we're hoping for the very best, but we're grateful for your time.
I don't want to be a prophet of doom.
Yeah, you don't have to be. Not at all. Let's be optimistic about the Ghanaian economy.
I also have to be realistic and speak the truth on what I see.
Let's see what the future holds. George Ricketts-Hagan, MP for Cape Coast South, and also a former Deputy Finance Minister, joining us here on The Pulse. When we return, we'll talk about the free senior high school policy. The President says it's working well, but truly, what's really effective about the free senior high school policy? We'll do that after this break.